Right, good morning. A little background about myself. I am an engineer. I've been at SPAWAR about 28 years. Spent the first 20 years working SIGINT and EW projects. And then about 8 years ago, I took a position in the contracting arena to help a group of technical folks to serve as experts in putting together contract packages for SSE Atlantic. And my group's been heavily involved in putting together these pillars, and it's called the Contracts Requirement Team, or the CRT. So next slide. Okay, so what were we thinking about when we put these together? First of all, my team has about 1,400 contracts under their belt. We've helped write a good portion of them, and we've had to live with all of them throughout execution. And obviously a lot of lessons learned from that, and a couple are that sometimes we tend to paint ourselves into corners with so much detail that the contract actually becomes obsolete after a couple of years because the programs change or the sponsors leave. And another lesson learned is that carving out work for small business in the long run tends to hurt small business because it limits what they can do in the long run, and they can never advance into new areas. So those are two things we're trying to fix. Secondly, we leveraged a couple examples. First one being Seaport E, which I assume most everybody's familiar with. It's a $40 billion Navy-wide engineering services contract. I actually served on one of the rolling admissions tabs for that. Got to review about 500 proposals. That was quite educational. There are things about Seaport that I don't think work very well, but one thing I think is really good is the PWS. So I kind of use that as a launching pad for our efforts. I think it does a really good job of describing the life cycle of products. The second example we used was Army ITES 2S, which, again, you're probably familiar with. It's a $20 billion IT services contract. I use that as a reality check. The interesting thing about that contract is that the requirement section has no sentences. It's all bullets. So when I found ourselves going down in the weeds, writing 1,000 words about something that didn't really matter that much, I'd pull out ITES and I'd say, hey, look, guys, they did it in 3 words. We don't need that much detail. So, and then finally what we did is we augmented my team with an IPT consisting of reps from each of the requirements competencies, and we locked ourselves in a room and hammered out standard language for every type of task that we could conceivably contract out. And so that's how the statements of work were born, or the performance work statement, excuse me. Next slide. Okay, so what's PWS look like? Pretty much like any other ones, really 4 sections. The one I'm not going to talk about are the reference documents, which should be fairly straightforward. Each of these RFPs have a scope focused on one of the 6 pillars. And on top of that, all of the portfolios have work that require access to SCI information, so we have provisions for that. However, due to security policy, there's some limitations on what we can do, so we won't be asking you to provide deliverables classified at the SCI level. You won't be storing SCI materials at your facilities, and we won't require a SCIF. Okay, in the requirements area, the tasking areas are identical across all 24 contracts, and did that for several reasons. Again, carving out tasks for small businesses tends to hurt them in the long run. And we also want to do things like use the same processes for things like software development across all the competencies. And then the last section is the administrative section, which unfortunately is bigger than the rest of the contract, but it's just the way it is. And everything's the same on all the 24 contracts except for security, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. Another thing to note is there's no key personnel requirements in these, so you can save your resumes for the task order competitions if we require them. And then finally, I think the drafts posted still have some leftover language about cores at the basic contract level in them, but when the finals come out, you'll see there will be no cores at the basic contract level, and we'll be following suit with Seaport and ITES, which don't have a core at the basic contract level. Next slide, please. Okay, the scope. Really, the scope of these contracts is to support the SPAWAR mission. And in other words, it's the full life cycle support of information dominance systems, C5, ISR, IO, enterprise information systems, and space capabilities. So intent here is if it's within the SPAWAR mission and it's legal to contract out, the intent is for it to be within the scope of these contracts. All right, in addition to the general scope, you'll see each contract is focused on one of the 6 portfolio areas. So if you want to receive reward of one of these, you need to be very strong technically in a portfolio product or capability area, and your costs have to be competitive. And we're going to make award to no more than the top 5 primes from a best value standpoint per RFP. And please note, I say focused, but I don't say they're exclusively for a portfolio. There's an intent here to build flexibility to share contracts across the portfolios where it makes sense. For example, the comm folks using the TCI pillar may develop a fantastic receiver technology, and the SIGINT guys might want access to that for certain reasons. And so it's conceivable that a SIGINT project under the B8 portfolio would use the TCI pillar to get that receiver work done. Okay, so your takeaways from this slide should be that if you receive pillar contract award, don't assume that you're entitled to all the work coming out of that portfolio, And it's really your business decision, but don't feel like you have to propose on all of these to avoid losing business from other portfolios. There will be opportunities to work across the portfolios. All right, next slide. Requirement sections, these are the 18 tasking areas that the IPT agreed to and the language underneath. I'd argue that everything that we've ever contracted for that's within our mission falls in one of these 18 areas, and all our previous contracts just contain different arrangements for these same 18 items, and the only difference being the products and sponsors supported. You may notice a lot of similarity with the Seaport task titles. However, once you drill down into the words, you'll see that a lot of them are tailored to our mission. And again, the tasking areas are the same for unrestricted and the set-asides to open as many doors as possible for small business. Okay, last slide. Okay, so administrative section, just want to talk about security for a second. Based on lessons learned from our 8A MAC, which was a $150 million contract that was awarded to 33 8A primes, we had a lot of issues with security, so we're building some flexibility into the security requirements for the 8A RFPs and the preference programs. For the 2 larger contracts, we're going to start with the top secret 254 right off the bat. But for the smaller guys, if you don't have a top secret facility clearance to start, we're going to start with a secret 254, and it'll really be your business decision whether you want to upgrade or not. So actually, that's all I'm prepared to talk about right now. So I guess with that, I'll turn it over to Steve Harnig. Thank you for your time.